In early 1940, V.G. Graben initiated design work on a 57mm anti-tank gun at Artillery Factory No. 92, confronting a calculation that would define Soviet anti-armor doctrine for the next 2 years. The KV-1 heavy tank, the Red Army's most formidable armored vehicle, carried frontal armor 90mm thick, a benchmark that dictated Graben's caliber selection. The 57mm diameter represented the minimum projectile size capable of delivering sufficient kinetic energy to defeat this thickness at combat ranges, while remaining light enough for a mobile crew to maneuver under fire. By mid-1940, Graben's engineers completed the barrel design, extending the tube beyond 4 meters in length to maximize propellant burn time and projectile acceleration. This extraordinary length-to-caliber ratio, designated L/73, generated muzzle velocities exceeding 1,000 meters per second, velocities that transformed the 57mm cartridge into a hypervelocity penetrator. The barrel integrated a semi-automatic vertical, sliding wedge breech mechanism, eliminating the manual opening and closing steps that slowed sustained fire. Loaders would insert rounds into a breech that cycled itself, achieving theoretical rates of 25 rounds per minute, though battlefield conditions typically reduced this to around 10. If you're interested in how wars are actually decided by logistics, math, weapons, and doctrine, subscribe now, turn on notifications, and stay tuned for more in-depth World War II analysis. Let's continue. The first prototype materialized in the summer of 1941, mounted on a split trail carriage that doubled as both transport chassis and firing platform. This carriage design allowed the trails to splay outward during emplacement, creating a stable triangular base that absorbed recoil forces from the weapon's extraordinary chamber pressures. The small gun shield offered minimal crew protection, a compromise accepting vulnerability in exchange for reduced weight. Formal adoption designated the weapon the 57mm anti-tank gun model 1941 with the ZIS-2 nomenclature derived from Zavod imeni Stalina, the factory responsible for series production. The 57mm caliber demanded entirely new manufacturing infrastructure. No existing tooling could produce the ammunition or barrel forgings. When German forces crossed the Soviet frontier on June 22, 1941, limited numbers of ZIS-2 guns stood distributed across Red Army anti-tank units, with production continuing through the invasion's opening months. By December 1941, approximately 371 total units had been manufactured before Soviet authorities abruptly terminated production. The reason was one of the strangest paradoxes of the entire war. Graben's needle was too good. Field reports from the fighting near Minsk, Smolensk, and across the Central Front documented systematic overpenetration of German armor. The 57mm projectiles punched through Panzer III and Panzer IV hulls without encountering sufficient resistance to trigger their explosive fillers. Where conventional anti-tank rounds would detonate inside target compartments after breaching armor plate, the ZS-2's hypervelocity projectiles frequently passed completely through both sides of a German tank. The BR-271K armor-piercing round, capable of penetrating over 100 millimeters of rolled homogeneous armor at close range, encountered German tank plates measuring just 30 to 50 millimeters in frontal protection. The shells went in one side and out the other. Gun crews reported hits, but post-battle examination revealed inconsistent target destruction. Per field reports, German tanks showed multiple penetration holes without catastrophic internal damage, crews having abandoned vehicles that remained mechanically functional. Soviet Artillery Command analyzed the tactical mathematics. The 76mm ZS-3 field gun delivered adequate penetration against current German armor while requiring less complex manufacturing and avoiding the ZIS-2's unique caliber. Logistics. The 45mm anti-tank gun could also defeat existing German armor at combat ranges. Why build the most expensive, most difficult to manufacture anti-tank gun in the Soviet arsenal when cheaper weapons killed the same targets? Production termination orders reached factory administrators in December 1941. The The 371st gun represented the final unit of a weapon system declared simultaneously too effective and insufficiently lethal. The semi-automatic breech would not cycle again in Soviet production facilities until German armor thickness demanded its resurrection. Through all of 1942, every Soviet weapons factory designated for anti-tank gun production continued manufacturing 45mm and 76mm guns. The ZS-2 production lines remained silent. All 371 manufactured guns sat in Siberian storage depots, their 4-meter barrels protected against temperatures dropping below -40 degrees. Factory number 92's tooling for the 57mm gun gathered dust while production capacity focused entirely on weapons deemed adequate for current German armor. The strategic calculus behind this decision rested on battlefield reports from 1941. Soviet intelligence correctly identified the Panzer III and Panzer IV as comprising the bulk of German armored forces. The Panzer IV's frontal armor, measuring 50mm, could be defeated by existing weapons at combat ranges. Soviet military planners saw no justification for the ZS-2's complex manufacturing requirements, which demanded precision boring for the L/73 barrel and specialized machining for components beyond the capacity of standard artillery production lines. Then, Germany changed the equation. In late August 1942, near Leningrad, German forces deployed the Tiger I for the first time on the Eastern Front. The Panzerkampfwagen 6 carried frontal armor measuring 100mm thick at near vertical angles. Soviet 45mm anti-tank guns achieved penetration of roughly 43mm at 500 meters. Tiger frontal armor measured 100mm. The mathematical gap between capability and requirement stood at 57mm of steel, the precise thickness that rendered Soviet anti-tank doctrine obsolete overnight. The ZIS-3 field gun fared little better. Its 90mm penetration at 500 meters insufficient against the Tiger's frontal protection. The 371 ZIS-2 guns remained in Siberian storage throughout the autumn and winter of 1942 as Tiger deployments expanded, and the Panther medium tank entered development with 80mm of sloped frontal armor. Soviet rearmament committees debated restart through the spring of 1943 as frontline units reported growing inability to defeat the newest German armor from the front. On June 15, 1943, production restart orders finally took effect. The redesignated Model 1943 variant emerged from the Gorky facility, its 4-meter barrel representing the longest anti-tank gun tube in current Soviet production. Workers transported the 371 stored units from Siberian depots simultaneously, retrofitting each with updated ammunition developed during the production hiatus. The guns that could defeat the Tiger had existed since 1941. They had been stored thousands of kilometers from the fighting for a year and a half. Testing at the Kursk salient established penetration parameters for tactical deployment. The ZIS-2 firing standard armor-piercing rounds achieved approximately 103mm of penetration against rolled homogeneous armor at 500 meters. This performance exceeded the Tiger I's 80mm side armor, creating the first widely available Soviet ground weapon capable of defeating Germany's heaviest operational tank from flank approaches at battalion engagement ranges. With tungsten core subcaliber projectiles, penetration values climbed even higher, threatening the Panther's sloped glacis at combat distances. Operation Citadel's opening on July 5, 1943, brought validation. ZS-2 positions along the Kursk bulge engaged advancing German armor, the hypervelocity projectiles defeating side plates that deflected standard 76.2mm rounds from the ZIS-3 divisional gun. The mathematical gap between threat and countermeasure closed across defensive sectors that had awaited precisely this weapon for over a year. Per Soviet reports, the semi-automatic breech allowed sustained engagement rates that overwhelmed German tactical expectations of anti-tank gun response times. Between June 1943 and the war's end, Soviet factories produced approximately 9,645 Model 1943 ZSS-2 guns, bringing total wartime production to roughly 10,016 units when combined with the 371 original specimens. The 57mm weapon delivered penetration values far exceeding the ubiquitous ZIS-3 field gun, establishing itself as the Red Army's premier dedicated anti-tank weapon for the war's final 2 years. The weapon found additional platforms during this period. Limited numbers of T-34 tanks received 57mm gun installations as the T-34-57 variant, offering tank crews penetration capability denied to the standard 76mm armed models, though production remained experimental. The ZS-2 also saw mounting on American-supplied M3 half-track chassis in small quantities as a self-propelled configuration. By January 1945, ZS-2 batteries deployed during the Vistula-Oder offensive engaged German armor while simultaneously serving as field artillery with high explosive shells. The weapon's dual capability, anti-armor precision, and indirect fire support gave Soviet commanders tactical flexibility that single-purpose anti-tank guns could not match. May 1945 brought stand-down orders to ZIS-2 units across the Eastern Front. The weapon's compact dimensions and manageable weight ensured retention within Soviet airborne forces into the post-war period, even as mainline units phased out the design as tank armor thickened beyond the 57mm projectile's practical limits. The cost of the production gap could not be calculated in guns alone. Every month, the ZIS-2 sat in Siberian storage while Tigers rolled into combat represented anti-tank capability absent from the defensive lines at Stalingrad and the approaches to Kursk. Graben's calculation from early 1940, the minimum caliber needed to defeat 90mm armor, had proven exactly correct. The weapon born from that calculation arrived at the front 18 months after it was needed, a delay measured not in industrial output, but in the lives of anti-tank crews firing 45mm rounds at armor they could not penetrate. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe for more World War II historical deep dives every week. Thanks for watching.